This is my sourdough version of Fugazzeta, Argentina's famous double layer pizza that's absolutely loaded with cheese in the middle. The creaminess of the cheese pairs perfectly with the caramelized onions on top. My version also has caramelized onions on the bottom and uses sourdough starter instead of yeast for the dough. Here's how to make it. Into a mixing bowl, add 160 grams of water, then add 100 grams of active sourdough starter. I fed my sourdough starter the night before using my no discard method, and in the morning I had 100 grams of starter ready to go. After the starter, add 6 grams of salt to the mixing bowl, and then 250 grams of all-purpose flour. If you want to use bread flour for this, that's totally fine. You can use bread flour, all-purpose, or a mixture of the two. Stir the ingredients together with a spoon until they're thoroughly combined, and once the dough looks like this, you're ready to knead. You can knead this dough by hand on the counter, or you can use a stand mixer like I'm going to do. Mix the dough for about 8 minutes with the dough hook attachment on low to medium speed. After 8 minutes, your dough should look something like this, and it'll be ready to shape into a ball. Move the dough from the mixing bowl onto your counter. You can put a little bit of flour on the counter if you need a little bit of extra help or if the dough feels too sticky, and shape it into a ball with your hands like this. You want to shape the dough into a ball so it's not all loosey-goosey in the bowl when it's rising. Add some extra flour to the top of the dough just so it doesn't stick as much, then transfer it back into the mixing bowl, cover it up, and let it rise at room temperature for 4 to 6 hours or until it doubles in size. While your dough is proofing, get half of a white onion and cut it into really thin strips that go against the grain of the onion, just like this. You want really thin strips that you can separate, and the thinness will help them cook well on top of the pizza. When the onions are cut, move them into a bowl, and you're going to add a few more ingredients to season these onions while the dough is proofing. A generous sprinkle of salt, probably about half a teaspoon, a little bit of black pepper as well, and then 1 to 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. Use enough oil to coat the onions. This will help them caramelize while they're baking on top of the pizza and keep them from burning. Mix all of this together so that the flavors combine with the onions, and then let this mixture rest in your fridge for at least a half hour or until your dough is done proofing. When your dough has doubled in size, tip it out onto a lightly floured countertop, then divide it evenly in two with a knife or a dough scraper. This pizza requires 2 layers, a top and a bottom layer of dough. So roll them each into a ball and let them rest on the counter for about 15 minutes. While the dough is resting, prepare a 10-inch cast iron skillet or cake pan or something similar with a little bit of olive oil. You want a nice layer on the bottom. Then add just about half of the onion mixture that you prepared before. Half of the onions are going to go on the bottom and get really caramelized in there with the cast iron, and then the other half are going to go on top of the pizza. Time to roll out the first layer of dough. This is going to be the bottom layer. Get flour on both sides and prepare to roll it with a rolling pin. The name of the game here is to roll out the dough until it's just a little bit bigger than the cast iron pan so that you're sure it fits. If you want to stretch out the dough by hand, you can definitely do that. It'll just take a little bit extra work than if you do it with a rolling pin. So go ahead and finish rolling out both layers of dough until they're just a little bit bigger than the size of your pan. Once you've done that, gently lay the first layer of dough on top of the onions in your pan, just like this. You want to make sure there's no crinkled edges or anything like that, so smooth the edges out, and then press the edges up the sides with the tips of your fingers like this. Now it's time to add the cheese. If you can only use one cheese, I would just use shredded, low-moisture, whole milk mozzarella cheese. I'm using 4 slices of whole milk, low-moisture mozzarella, a few slices of fresh mozzarella for some creaminess, and then a bunch of shredded, low-moisture mozzarella. They use a creamy cow's milk cheese in Argentina. Mozzarella will be pretty close. After the cheese, add the next layer of dough right on top like this, and then you're going to want to press around the edges of the dough around the cheese, connecting the first layer of dough with the second layer, kind of like you're making a pie with the bottom and a top crust. Then so the cheese doesn't ooze out while you're baking this, go ahead and just crimp the edges down, pressing the 2 layers of dough together. This will give you a more interesting looking crust, and it'll keep the cheese inside of the pizza. As the cheese cooks, the steam will puff up this pizza like a balloon, so poke it a bunch of times with a fork. This will keep the ballooning effect to a minimum. Now take the rest of that onion mixture that was seasoned with oil, salt, and pepper and spread it all over the top of this pizza. Those are going to cook in the oil beautifully as this pizza bakes in the oven. One last touch before cooking is a sprinkle of Parmesan cheese on top. That's going to bake up really nicely alongside the onions in the oven, giving the upper crust of this pizza a really delicious flavor. There's no need for a second proof for this type of pizza, so it's time to bake. Put this in the middle rack of your oven that you've preheated to 450 degrees Fahrenheit and let it cook for 30 to 40 minutes until it's golden brown and looking something like this. Mine puffed up a little bit in the middle. That'll die down as you pull it out of the oven. 35 minutes later, this pizza was ready to remove from the cast iron. Use a sturdy spatula to just scrape underneath, getting any of those stuck bits unstuck, and then put your pizza onto a wire rack to cool for a couple of minutes. There's a few last seasonings to top off this fugazzeta. A few sprinkles of dried oregano, and then a few olives. I'm using green olives, but I'm sure you can use black olives or any olives that you like the taste of, but I wouldn't leave the olives off because they add a brininess and a zinginess to this really creamy and cheesy pizza. I think they're really worth it. If you've never tried pizza without red tomato sauce, you really need to give this fugazzeta a try. The roasted onions and savory herbs pair so well with this creamy cheese, and the zingy olives pair really well with the cheese, and oh, that cheese pull. If you like cheese pizza, you will love this fugazzeta. And those caramelized onions on the bottom, those aren't hurting anybody. So glad I put those there. If you've never made Argentinian fugazzeta, give this sourdough version a try, and I'll see you in the next video.